Well, good morning and welcome to this very, very important press conference here from the COVID-19 Media Center. My name is Ursula Charles Jr. You're tuned to the Nation station. Of course, this press conference being simulcast across the nation on all radio platforms as well. We've got some associated media representatives with us this morning. This is a press conference, very highly anticipated, brought to you by the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. We've got some principal technocrats within the ministry as well as the minister, and together they will bring you plans as the nation looks forward to a return to face-to-face instruction for the nation's children. Allow me now to just introduce to you the members of the head table. We've got two additional members to sit with us this morning, but currently on the head table, we begin with the Minister with Responsibility for Education, Science and Technology, the Honorable Michael Brown. Good morning. We've got the Director of Education, Mr. Claire Brown Esquire. He sits with us as well. Education Officer, responsibility for school administration, particularly for primary schools in Zone 3, Dr. Desiree Antonio. And we've also got the Education Officer with responsibility for secondary schools, acting that is, Mrs. Denise Mills.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, we will first hear from the Minister with responsibility for Science and Technology. We'll introduce the other officers to you as they take their seats. Mr. Minister, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, ABS. Good morning to Antigua and Barbuda. Pleasant good morning to all the members here. Well, let me say, first of all, we want to start by thanking the public of Antigua and Barbuda, primarily for their patience. We do understand that, especially now, in this time of COVID, one of the key areas that lay fundamentally on people's minds is, what is the school year going to look like? What's the new school year going to look like? And so we want to thank them for their patience, and this is because the government of Antigua and Barbuda and the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, before we come to the public, we want to make sure that we would have explored all the various possibilities to ensure that we can open our schools safely while providing all the possible alternatives for students to be educated and for parents so that they can feel comfortable as well. With me this morning is a very detailed team. I will allow the Director of Education to go into the extent when he introduces the full team. But I want to start by, first of all, giving the assurance to the public that the government and the ministry, we are very committed to ensuring that for this academic school year coming up, that we take all the necessary precautions, all the necessary steps to ensure that students are educated in an environment that is conducive to their learning. We know that there's quite a bit of banter, there's quite a bit of concern, and rightly so, as to whether or not we should open schools, whether schools should remain closed. And we do understand that, and I think one of the things every single member of this panel is a parent. And so we not only share in the empathy and concerns of the public, but we fully feel and experience what they're going through as well for the safety of our own children. And your children are our children. Having said that, the Ministry of Education, working in consultation with quite a number of stakeholders, we have done broad consultations. We have presented plans. We have revised those plans. We have created alternatives in dire situations. We have examined all the possibilities that have come to the fore and that we can think of. And this morning we want to present. It won't be just I am doing a presentation, but all the technicians are here who are responsible, who are heads of the various sectors and departments, to do a presentation on their respective departments. I want to use this opportunity before we start to thank the Director of Education, Science and Technology and his entire team on the educational side of the ministry. I also want to use the opportunity to thank the Permanent Secretary and her entire team on that portion of the ministry, along with the Board of Education, Science and Technology and the Ministry of Public Works, primarily because while we plan for the academic portion, and of course the academics, the delivery of academics is going to look fundamentally different than what we're used to. But at the same time, we have had to do a serious adjustment in the physical space in many of the schools. And as a result of that, some schools, we have expanded some schools, and some schools, in all schools, we have ensured that additional hand washing stations, sanitization stations are put in place. We've ensured that in what is generally our packed schools, we ensure that there is adequate or sufficient social distancing to be put in place. And we have literally pulled out all the stops to ensure that our students are safe. So I want to thank the ministry collectively. I want to thank the Board of Education, the Ministry of Works, and all the additional stakeholders who would have played a fundamental part in allowing us to be able to reach to this point. And what I would want to say most fundamentally to parents, students, educators, in order for us to make this a success, it means all of us now must apply ourselves to what can practically and possibly occur looking forward. At this juncture, I turn over to Director Clay Brown.
Thank you very much, Minister. Morning, everybody. Morning, Mr. Charles. I also recognize the journalists who are joining us via Skype. I want to say good morning to your audience, the ABS's audience, and the wider audience. I would want to begin by thanking ABS for the way they have supported the Ministry of Education, not just through these COVID times, but the way ABS has supported the Ministry of Education all along with our various programs. And in particular, the way that they have supported us during these COVID times, Homeschool 101 and all the other programs, and the way they will support us when we take over in due course Channel 11 as the education channel. So, Mr. Charles, I would want you to convey to the General Manager and the entire staff of ABS how grateful we are at the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology for the support that we have received. We would have announced previously that schools will reopen for face-to-face and a blended approach, face-to-face and online learning for public schools from the 31st of August, 31st of this month for teachers, and from the 7th of September for students. And we did indicate at the time we made the announcement via a press release that the intention of the Ministry of Education is to have that blended approach where schools face-to-face, students come in face-to-face, and then we will have the online aspect of it. Now, it means that, and we will discuss this later on, it means that we are going to either what we call a shift system or whether we call it alternate days. So in primary schools, they will do a shift system between morning and afternoon, AM and PM. And then in secondary schools, public secondary schools, you will do alternate days. Now, there are some schools, some primary schools and a few secondary schools that will be able to have regular school, and certainly we will be expounding on that as we go along. But somewhere in the first paragraph of my presentation, Mr. Charles, I want to make it pellucid that the plans and protocols that we roll out today are not plans and protocols of the Ministry of Education. They're plans and protocols of Antigua and Barbuda. They're the country's plans. These plans were developed through widespread key stakeholder consultations. The Ministry of Education believes, you see, education is everybody's business, and the Ministry of Education believes in consulting widely. And we, even at this juncture, we continue to consult. Even as late as last night, we were consulting, and tomorrow, this afternoon, today, we will continue to have those conversations. So we have consulted with education officials, we have consulted with principals and teachers, we have consulted with parents, we have consulted with private sector business, we have consulted with NGOs, we have consulted with public sector to include the ministries of health, works, information. We have consulted with the cabinet of Antigua and Barbuda, and also we have consulted with the Antigua and Barbuda Union of Teachers and the Antigua and Barbuda Transport Board, and as I just said, consultations continue. We continue to talk. And so in this first paragraph, I also want to say, it's a long paragraph, I also want to say that the plans and protocols that we present today are not cast in stone. I want to say that again. The plans and protocols that we present today are not cast in stone. We exist, we understand fully that the situation, the environment in which we exist is a fluid one. And so built into the plans would be that flexibility to accommodate whatever changes. We live in a dynamic context, and so whatever changes, we have to respond to those changes in the plans. And so I want to assure the public that that is the intention, clear intention of the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. COVID-19 did not spare our children. Children have lost what they have been accustomed. Several things that they have been accustomed. They have lost, for example, security. They have lost routine. And the Ministry of Education is mindful that if we do not provide education, then we run the risk of causing our children and young people to lose their future. There is life on the other side of COVID-19, and our youngsters must be prepared to navigate the world even after COVID-19. In emergencies for children, education is not just about the right to learn, but it also, schools also provide protection for our young people, protection from abuse, protection from exploitation. Schools provide an opportunity for many of our young people to get even one nutritious meal per day. Schools provide an opportunity for our youngsters to receive psychological support. And so the Ministry of Education is deliberate and serious about ensuring that we throw our doors again to our institutions so that our students, our children and young people may be engaged in active and meaningful ways, but in a relatively safe environment. And so we have put everything in place. We are putting everything in place to ensure that we mitigate against the risks to the health and safety of all persons who operate in schools. And Mr. Charles, I'm going to make it easy for you, and I'm going to ask myself the million-dollar question up front and early and answer the question one time. So if in March, mid-March, we closed school when there was one case of COVID-19, how on earth are we opening schools now there are 13 active cases of COVID-19? You see, in mid-March, we had no protocols. We had no protocols pertaining to how we operate within a pandemic. We had no hand-washing stations. We had no social distancing in schools. We had no face masks. Fast forward today, we are ensuring that all these things are in place. And I want to assure the general public that there are plenty of reasons. There are plenty of reasons, let me put it this way, there are plenty of reasons why we should open schools. We should open schools, and I talked about some of them because, of course, we need to ensure that children's education continue in a meaningful way. We should open schools for in-person instructions, because you see, when we say, okay, online learning, we are mindful that the data that we pulled indicated to us that not everybody was engaged. When we walk through the communities, we see the youngsters running up and down the place, youngsters being doing what youngsters would do, and not realizing and recognizing the dangers, the risks that they pose to themselves and to others. But the one thing, the one barometer that I believe that trumps everything else when we talk about open schools, it has to be the epidemiological situation of the country. And that word, the persons in health gave me that word, and all it simply means is the prevalence of the virus in the society. And if our situation continues where non-imported cases remain low, not contact tracing, but community spread is almost non-existent, because community spread is a different story from local transmission. And if local transmission remains very little, then we could find, once we apply all the protocols, then we could safely open our institutions. I want to make it clear to the general public that if the experts in the Ministry of Health say to the Ministry of Education that the conditions are not of such that we could safely reopen schools, the Ministry of Education will not be reopening schools for face-to-face instructions. But once the experts, we have to trust the process and follow the science. And if the persons that know will advise that things are in a place that we can open, if they inspect our schools, once we are ready for inspection, and we will be in the next few short days, and everything is found to be in good order, so that we can safely, because we will not compromise anybody's health and safety. But once everything is in order, then we will throw our doors, as we said we will do. I just want to end by suggesting that today's plan will focus on 7 main things as we present. So we are going to be speaking to, I just referred to my notes, curriculum recovery measures, infrastructural upgrades and expansion, training in the delivery of instructions virtually, technological solutions, policies and procedures and protocols, communication strategy, and any kind of plan and program that you put in place, there has to be built into it some monitoring mechanism. And so we will very quickly at the end speak to monitoring and evaluation of what we do. And that has to be constantly going on and revising and making adjustments as we go along. And so today, the other technicians with me will be speaking to the areas that I have highlighted, and you would have introduced the 2 on set with us currently, and then the Deputy Director of Education and the Assistant Director of Education for Planning, Training and Research will also join us. So Deputy Director Green and Assistant Director Maskell will also join us on set in due course, and will lend their voices to what we will present this morning. So those are my opening words, and then I am going to invite Dr. Desiree Antonio now to speak to the policies, protocols, and procedures that we have established for the reopening of schools.
Pleasant good morning to the listening and viewing audience, and of course our virtual world. Over the past few weeks, the Ministry of Education, alongside the Antigua and Barbuda Union of Teachers, has worked diligently to create a number of protocols. As the Director would have emphasized, life does go on in this COVID era, and education in emergency must go on as well. So over these past few weeks, we examined several areas of the school environment critical to the health and safety of our students and our staff members. We came up with 15 protocols and accompanying procedures. For the successful observance and implementation of these protocols, we identified expectations of the various stakeholders. And I will just give an example of a few of these expectations. For all stakeholders, we expect that they be responsible in observing all COVID-19 protocols and associated practices in the quest to preserve human health and life. The Ministry of Education as well, we have an expectation of the Ministry of Education to be responsive to the needs within the education system arising as a result of COVID-19. The Board of Education to work in harmony with the Ministry of Education and Schools in ensuring that timely and adequate support, technical and material, is provided in the current COVID-19 pandemic. And we have other stakeholders as well, such as our parents, expectations of parents, principals, and our students. For example, the students to be model students by observing the requisite COVID-19 protocols. I must remind us all that we are all in this together, and we must all play our part to keep each other safe. I will now go into the protocols, but I first would like to mention that we did not just pull these out of the air. We consulted several sources and reviewed particular documents, and I will tell you that some of these sources were from the World Health Organization, UNICEF, CARPHA, the Global Education Cluster, several documents from our Caribbean partners in the ministries of education, for example, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica. We also reviewed documents coming out of the United States, the Center for Disease Control, educational institutions based in Florida, Texas, New York, etc. We also had our own guidelines for CXC, which we consulted, and we also had direct consultations with a few groups: the Ministry of Health, principals, the Antigua and Barbuda Union of Teachers, the school bus, the Board of Education, and as Director says, our consultations continue. And so I will just briefly go into our protocols, because I know, as Director says, it's a working document, and it's a fluid situation, and things will change. But we had to plan in advance of the reopening of school. So Protocol 1 refers to screening. All persons who enter our school compound, or before they enter the school compound, they'll be subjected to temperature checks. They should wear masks to cover their nose and mouth. There'll be hand washing stations at the entrance, and so they'll be expected to wash their hands. And at this point, we are not advocating non-education personnel to visit our schools. It will be very difficult to control such traffic on the school compound. Protocol 2 deals with physical distancing, ideally 6 feet, but in some situations it might be reduced. And so we are saying that within the school environment, that physical distancing should be practiced, breaks will be staggered, and movements on the school compound will be controlled. We are also recommending that whole school assembly, which we would do in the past, would be limited, and if assemblies are done, there are 3 options that can be explored by principals. Some schools have courtyards that are large and can accommodate the physical distance with the number of students, or halls, or the auditorium. And in cases where that is not possible, especially for teachers, staff meetings, and so on, that we recommend that they be virtually done. Protocol 3 talks about personal protective equipment. Now, everybody in Antigua and Barbuda has one of those, or at least part of the complete set. Masks. Everyone, as we mentioned before, as they enter the school compound, should have a visibly clean mask. Persons who deal with children at the early childhood center or the level, and also special needs students, should have PPEs, gowns, gloves, and face shields. Now, there'll be special considerations because we know that persons out there, they do have health challenges, and guided by medical practitioners, they should present us with medical documentation supporting complaints, medical challenges that they possess. So our medical practitioners will guide in that area. Protocol 4 talks about hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. Of course, we advocate soap and water first of all. And in the absence of soap and water, the use of hand sanitizers. We would have the wash basins at the beginning or entry of the school compound and in other strategic places on the school compound, and the hand sanitizers dispensers will also be located strategically around the school compound. We are encouraging our students, staff, to do the usual, clean your hands before entering any classroom, before and after eating lunch or snack, and of course using the bathrooms and so on. Respiratory etiquette, we talk about sneezing in your elbow or in a tissue and throwing it away in a covered bin. And we're expecting that all staff as well should have a personal pouch, an emergency pouch, in which they will have their own hand sanitizer, asthma pump, extra mask as well, because you can have accidents. And I must say that the Ministry of Education will be providing each student with a hand sanitizer and 2 face masks. Protocol 5 deals with cleaning and disinfecting, and a lot of this rests on the shoulders of our custodians or cleaners and groundsmen within schools. The principals will be working with the cleaners and their supervisors to put a schedule together in terms of who cleans what, where, when, and with what. We're expecting as well that, in particular in secondary schools, that when students leave a classroom to move on to another, before a fresh group of students enter that classroom, that it will be sanitized. Also, frequently touched surfaces ought to be cleaned every 2 hours. Number 6, Protocol 6, dealing with suspected cases. Students who display COVID-like symptoms, elevated temperatures, their parents will be contacted, and we're asking that if the parent cannot get to the school within the hour of notification, that they make arrangements for somebody to come and collect their child. Of course, we'll have an isolation area where we'll have that child until the parent comes to collect the child. Staff as well should observe the established protocols as civil servants using the civil service regulations and also the labor code in terms of how they report illnesses. And of course, we continue to urge persons, just a general thing, you're sick, please remain at home. Protocol 6 deals with emergency drills. Schools are dynamic places, and we still want schools to observe the emergency drills. And so in conducting these drills, they should actually observe the protocols as well. But of course, in the actual emergency, you have to, adjust accordingly. Protocol 8 deals with food handling, food services, our vendors, cafeteria staff, school meals. And the Education Act points out how these persons actually access the school compound and apply their service. And so, for example, cafeteria operators must have a signed contract endorsed by the permanent secretary, and our vendors, upon recommendation of the principals, the application is approved by the Director of Education. Next week, there will be training from the Ministry of Health for our vendors and cafeteria operators. So we are getting that level of support from the Ministry of Health. Protocol 9 talks about extra and co-curricular activities. These are essential activities within schools, and so they must continue. We have the performing arts, sports, and other physical activities, and there are specific protocols that govern these activities. For example, musical instruments, when they are used, they have to be cleaned before and after, etc., and the usual hand washing, sanitizing of hands. Protocol 10 deals with the school bus. The school buses will be sanitized before and after each of the trips. We would have had consultation with the school bus personnel, and we have asked too that they consider checking temperatures before the students actually enter the school bus. So that is something under consideration. Also, the students will be expected to sanitize their hands before entering the school bus. There is a concern that would have been voiced by the principals that at the various bus stops or stations where the children perhaps wait for transfers, that we want to ensure that the social distancing occurs there as well. And so we are asking our students and our parents to assist us in that area. There will be further consultations with the school bus folks and the Ministry of Health, especially as it relates to the capacity of the buses when school reopens. Protocol 11 deals with communication, and that has a lot to do with signage being placed at strategic places around the school compound, in our classrooms, hallways, bathrooms, offices, etc. We're hoping too that schools make sure that information that is provided is current and up to date. Also, that the information shared would be for knowledge and for implementation. Information relating to timetabling, because Mrs. Mills will speak a little more about that, and other schedules, for example, break and lunch, ought to be communicated in a timely manner to our students and our parents so that they will know how to operate on the school compound. And we are asking also for parents to provide updated contacts to the schools. Sometimes we are not able to reach parents, but it is critical that we have updated contacts, 1 or 2 contacts of parents should we need to call them. Protocol 12 deals with student support. Director spoke about the anxieties that we all are facing at this time, and so our students likewise. And so there will be orientation on the first few days on the return of school. There'll be reminders, there'll be specific sessions to assist our students to, continue to become more comfortable within the school environment. And also there'll be monitoring of our students as they return to schools. Protocol 13 refers to or addresses external support services. Our schools are known to have a number of partnerships within the community, but at this time, the contribution that they make, especially the face-to-face contact within schools, will be limited. And so we are encouraging virtual means if they must have sessions with students or within the schools, that it be done virtually. Protocol 14 talks about curriculum and assessment, and I won't go into too much detail because I know Mrs. Green will deal with that. But of course, in the first 2 weeks or so, there'll be diagnostic testing, adjustments made to the curriculum, and our specialist teachers and our general teachers at the various schools, we're working closely with the education officers responsible for curriculum areas. Protocol 15 speaks to school administration. How does the principal and the management team put all of these protocols in place? What's the responsibilities of the various individuals? How are we going forward with planning? How is implementation going to look like? How are we going to support and continue to monitor what is happening in the school environment? And so, again, the protocols that we would have identified, they're not etched in stone. We are in a very fluid situation. And so with continuous consultations and revisions, we are hoping to continue with our quest to make sure that our school environment is safe and healthy as students and staff return. So thank you very much.
What Dr. Antonio presented is just a capsule of the bigger protocol document, and we want to assure that the bigger protocol document will eventually find its way on the ministry's website. So in short order, so persons would be able to go there and access the bigger protocol document. It is Mrs. Mills' turn now, and she is going to be speaking about how we return to the school schedule for students.
Thank you, Director Brown. A pleasant morning to everyone. I am pleased this morning to highlight to you the instructional plans for the return of school for teachers the 31st of August, and for our students, the 7th of September 2020. We in the Ministry of Education are very concerned.
Thank you. Dr. Antonio, could you take yours off as well? Thank you. Your mic is off.
We in the Ministry of Education are very concerned about the health and safety of our students, our teachers, and in general, the school community. Therefore, we are making efforts to ensure that the reopening of school would foster a very safe and secure experience for our students and all on the compound. With this in mind, we are embarking on an approach that will cater for that aspect of our returning of school. That is the phase-in approach. With the phase-in approach, our students will return to school not all at once. And so, being phased in, it will give them the opportunity to be oriented with regards to the new norms, what is expected. Additionally, it will also prepare them as they become familiar with the protocols, the timetable, and all other expectations on the school compound. Additionally, as we phase our students in, we are able to better view and have an idea of what the reopening of school is really like. And so we would be able to make the necessary changes as they happen along the way. And so the question is, what would the phasing process be like for our schools? And so I ask you now to focus a bit on our primary public schools as I highlight to you what the phasing approach will look like. For our public primary schools, week 1, commencing 7th September to the 11th September, all kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 6 students only are expected to be at school. For week 2, commencing 14th of September to the 18th of September, all classes, in addition to grades 3, 4, and 5, are expected to operate fully on the compound. Additionally, there are some schools that will be functioning on a shift system. That is, all the students will be at school, yes, but at different times during the course of the day. And so during the phasing period, we have for week 1, for those schools with the shift system, kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3, and 6 students only will be on the compound. For week 2, all classes to include grades 3, 4, and 5 will operate on a shift system. There are some schools that we recognize the population is a bit small, and so the approach, the shift or the phasing approach, will not apply to these schools. Bear in mind that the roll is very small. Now, I have looked briefly at the primary schools. I will now highlight the public secondary schools. Within the public secondary schools, the phasing system looks like this. On the 7th September, Monday, 7th September, all first formers will attend school. Tuesday, 8th September, all second formers will attend school. Wednesday, 9th September, all third formers will attend school. Thursday, 10th September, fourth form students will attend school. And on Friday, 11th September, all fifth form students will attend school. The week beginning the 14th of September, all students will resume regular classes as outlined by the instructional plan that will be presented shortly. With regards to our private schools, the private schools will inform the parents and students as to how they will be beginning the academic year 2020-2021. Having outlined the phasing process, I will now highlight the instructional plan, and these instructional plans were submitted by our principals. They would have taken time and assessed the schools with regards to the spaces available, with regards to the role, and all the other dynamics within the schools. As we embark on face-to-face instructions, you will observe, and you would have been told, that we will be engaging blended learning. And all schools are expected to utilize the online platform for that purpose. I will now highlight to you the instructional plan for the primary schools, starting with Zone 1. As you can see on the graph, Zone 1, there are 7 public primary schools that are able to return fully, having regular sessions. There are 5 private primary schools as well that will be able to operate fully, and 1 private school yet to be finalized. As we move on to Zone 2, there are 5 public primary schools that will be able to function during the full day regular sessions, and 6 private primary schools. 1 public primary school will utilize the shift system, and that public primary school is Potter's Primary. 2 2 private primary schools are yet to be finalized. And as you look at the graph, you can see all the schools outlined, clearly outlined on the graph. We move on to Zone 3. Within Zone 3, 6 public primary schools and 6 private primary schools will be able to function fully. 2 public primary schools and 1 private primary will utilize the shift system. At this time, Foundation Mix and the Seaview Farm schools are the 2 schools that will be able to function utilizing the shift system. And you can clearly see that outlined on the graph presented.
J.T. Ambrose as well.
J.T. Ambrose is also on the shift system as well. As we move on to Zone 4, 7 public and 9 private primary schools will function fully. T.N. Kernan and Mary E. Pickett schools, they are yet to be finalized. Now, with regards to the instructional plans presented, as was mentioned, they are not cast in stones. As we return to the classroom, face-to-face instructions, we will realize where changes are needed, and those changes, if necessary, will be made. We will now move on to the secondary schools. The secondary school hours remain from 8 until 1:30. And as you can see on the graph, 5 public secondary schools and 6 private secondary schools will be able to function regularly as a whole school when we return on the 7th of September. 8 public secondary and 1 private will operate using the alternate days. And let me share an example with regards to the alternate days. A particular school can have on Monday forms 1 and 2, and on Tuesday forms 3, 4, and 5. And it continues like that. And this arrangement has been made to accommodate the protocols that have been established, as well as the fact that the school roll is a bit high for everyone to be in the same place at the same time. And so with the instructional plans being laid out, the principals have been working. Up to this moment, they should be on vacation, but they're still ensuring that the school plant is in readiness for the reopening of school in September. To many, you might be wondering, as the director said, why open school? Why not? I just want to encourage all of us to just let us work together to make it happen. I just want to single out at this time our principals and the team for the work that you have been doing. Keep up the good work. As we work together, we will make a difference. Remember, we are thinking about the health and safety of our students. I want to also thank our parents for your continued support. I know that you are concerned, and yes, we are concerned too. And that is why every day we are engaged in meetings, in planning sessions, because we want to ensure that we get it right. And once we will have gotten it right, we are going to execute the plan and make the plan work. We cannot do it alone. We cannot do it alone. So I am employing you this morning to continue to support us, continue to give advice and suggestions. We welcome them because, as I've mentioned, the health and safety of our students, our teachers, and all those who will be on that school plan is critical. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your kind attention. And I pray that as we go forward, and we launch out for the face-to-face reopening of school, that it will be a smooth transition for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mills, and congrats on the promotion to the Ministry of Education. We now go to hear from Mrs. Stacey Payne-Maskell. She Assistant Director of Education with responsibility for planning, training, research, and educational services. Mrs. Maskell.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Mr. Charles. And it's really a privilege to be here, a part of a team that is coming with the assurance to parents that we are ready. We are ready to bring our children back into a safe space where they can be engaged in meaningful and active learning. To begin my presentation this morning, and coming from the planning unit as we are in charge of research, it is only fair that I bring data. And so I will start the presentation this morning looking just at two graphs. And those graphs really point out data that we got from a needs assessment survey, which would have been done in April. And a part of that survey, we had roughly 920 persons participating, which represents more than 50% of our teachers. And so here we asked a question in the survey to teachers as to how many students they were able to reach in an online modality. And based on the data, there is no bar that is showing 100%. And that is cause for concern. And even as we look even deeper into the data, because there were some open-ended questions that were posed, some teachers would have hinted, even though we would have reached the students, some of them weren't actively engaged. And so even the data there would have been significantly reduced if we actually looked at who really participated in active learning. If we go on to the next slide, we not only offered a modality of online, but we also offered a modality of paper-based, because obviously there were some students who we could not reach online. And so the next graph would show that even more so, we didn't really reach a lot of students. And this really reflects mostly our primary schools, where we would have struggled a bit in terms of reaching, even using our printed material. And so, as director, as all the other officers would have emphasized, there is that need to bring our students back to face-to-face learning, because there are significant gaps that are there that our children do have, and we need to bring them back into that space where the assessments can be done, where the intervention plans can be created, and Mrs. Green will give further information as to that. In addition to that, we need to be aware that depending on the age of the child, or even the learning preferences, everyone being online is not really having a terrific day. And so we have to take all these things into consideration. And the director would have listed a number of social implications. He would have also noted that our schools are safe havens, and we have to make sure that we do our role in protecting our children. So already unveiled are the protocols that we would have established in terms of making our environment safe. And now I'm just going to guide us through the infrastructure, the facilities or the expansions, proposed expansions, upgrades that we will be embarking on for the next few weeks. Now, it was a collaborative process. As Mrs. Mills would have hinted, we would have had our principals right at the heart of the consultations. They would have been managers of plans, would have given us data as to what are the requirements that they would need. And so we would have gone back, we would have consulted further, and we would have come up with a list of things that we need to have happening on our school plans to get them ready for the reopening. CXC, the opportunity when the C6 students returned, it would have provided us with an opportunity to, as a phase 1. And so already some of our school plants are outfitted with our wash stations, etc. Now, in terms of facilities, we're looking at additional learning spaces. Having gone into our schools, would have measured classrooms based on the social distancing protocol. We would have used the measurement of 6 feet, actually. We would have noted we need additional spaces. And so already the schools would have, we would have determined how many additional spaces depending on the number of students or the number of persons that can be at any one given time on a school plant. We would have noted additional desk chairs, the wash stations that we do need, the dispensers for both soap and sanitizer. We would have even gone to the extent to look at the water supply to make sure we always have water on school plants. And so the whole issue of manual pumps, knowing very well that we do have electricity problems, we would have noted that. And so some schools, we are procuring manual pumps, and in the event that our cisterns are not really standing up, we are going to be putting some water tanks in place so that there is always water. Now, of course, the regular deep cleaning will be done for our school plants so that to ensure that they are sanitized, our children, as they go back in, will go back to a clean environment. Now, you would have also heard Dr. Antonio listing in the protocols a whole cleaning process that will take place. So it's not just deep cleaning and then return, and then when things get contaminated, they still stay in those environments. We are going to be cleaning all the time, every time. Our cleaners would have been trained by the Ministry of Health in June. We have discussed additional refreshers, and so we are going all the way to ensure that the spaces are sanitized and they're safe. In terms of equipment, of course, thermometers now has become one of our staple in terms of equipment. Our waste receptacles, we are going to be procuring covered waste bins. Of course, we have our hand sanitizer, our liquid soap, our personal or PPEs, and as Doc would have qualified what those are, most of us are wearing part of. But there are special instances, for example, in our special needs schools, or in the event where if a child falls ill, or if perchance at a lower grades where there has to be that close contact, we have to protect teacher and child, and so we'll be making a few of those completed package in terms of gowns, everything available. Of course, gloves, face masks, as would have been announced. The Ministry of Education will be giving each child a mask, and so we are going to we are doing what we can do so that we can further help parents. And of course, face shields as well. We're hoping to make provisions for that. Now, I just want to share with you a picture, because we would have determined, given the time constraints, as well as maybe the better option, I'm showing you a model of the open learning space that we're hoping to put in schools. Now, this model would have been tested. It's actually a picture on one of our school plans, and we're hoping to use these as multi-purpose areas as well, where the children, even though they receive instructions, they can also use to, have their meals in a safe space where they can practice social distancing. And so we continue to work towards that particular model. Now, I just want to say thank you to our partners. I want to say thank you to the Rotary Club of Antigua and Barbuda. The Rotary Club of Antigua and Barbuda came forward, and they're going to be doing an expansion of the School for the Deaf facility, and we just want to say thank you on behalf of the Ministry of Education, of course, the staff at the School for the Deaf. We also want to say thank you to the Board of Education and the Ministry of Work. Already, they're operationalizing the plans, and so we will be working real quickly so that we can make sure that the requests that were made to make our institutions functional to accommodate our students, teachers, and all those who will interface with us, that they'll be ready for the time frame as posted by the director, the 7th or the 31st of August. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Maskell. Mrs. Jonah Green, who is the Acting Deputy Director of Education, will now address us.
Yes, thank you very much. It is our aim, it is our goal to return to what we would call normalcy. in order to achieve that goal, there are 4 major things that we would really want to make sure happen. We want to ensure that our school learning environment is ready, and we would have put the procedures in place. We would have been hearing about our instructional plans. We also ensured that the resources were in place with reference to making sure that our teachers are prepared, our auxiliary and support staff, equipment, supplies, all of those things are ready. We also made sure that the infrastructural requirements would have been put in place, and Mrs. Masker would have just mentioned the lens through which we would have gone through to ensure that we have not just additional open, but closed spaces, equipment, supplies, to ensure that school happens. But school is not school without the curriculum, because in order for us to get our students to the place where at the end of the academic year, they are back to where they are supposed to be, it means that we would have had to do some curriculum recovery. During remote learning, we are very much aware that some of our students did not get sufficient instruction. Some of our students received some received too much instruction, and others received no instruction. So it means that from the school's perspective, we have to ensure that every single child at the end of the academic year gets back to the place where they are supposed to be. So if we have a grade 2 student, we want to make sure that at the end of the academic year, they are going to be able to comfortably get to the curriculum and meet the standards that are set by that curriculum. So it means we will have to do some curriculum recovery. The first thing we did from the Ministry of Education's end and through our curriculum unit was to do some research. We tried to figure out through surveys and research from our teachers, what did you teach? How much did you teach? How many students you reached and all of that. Now with that data in place, we are then able to focus or assess the students that come onto the plant. So once our students return to school on the 7th of September, we are going to assess every single child to find out where are they. So a child that was previously in Form 1 last year and is moving on to second form, we need to figure out how much of the first form curriculum did that child receive, and what do we have to do to get that child ready for second form. So from a school's perspective and what we do as teachers, we do differentiated instruction. And by that we mean we test every single child, and then we provide instruction for that child to get that child to the level that we want that child to get to. So it means that those students that are below standard, we give them additional help, additional stimulation to get them on par. Those students who are above, we give them extra to keep them where they are supposed to be, or to get them, put them in an advanced learning situation. So at the end of the year, we are going to ensure that through what we call differentiation, every single student is at the level they are supposed to be at. Now, teaching and learning does not happen without support for teachers, support for students, and a monitoring of our curriculum. So it means that through our curriculum department, we are going to be providing a lot of support for our teachers. It means we are going to be monitoring the curriculum, our principals, our heads of departments. We are going to be monitoring the curriculum to make sure that we are where we are supposed to be. Now, so far we have been learning that schools are going to be doing different things come the 7th of September. We learned that some of our primary schools will be going full-time, others will be doing a shift system. Some of our secondary schools will be going full-time, others will be doing what we call a blended shift system. What does that mean? In blended learning, or what we call blended learning, it is a mix between face-to-face instruction, especially for our schools, and online learning. So the student then goes home and learn using the internet capabilities, or what we call Google Classroom. Now, with our secondary schools, we have a situation where our students will be doing a 1 day in, 1 day out. What does that mean, or what would that look like? On the day when our students will be at school, we will be doing face-to-face instruction, where teachers are going to be teaching face-to-face. At the end of that day, the following day, or the alternate day, students will be learning from home. Now, this means that we are not just going to allow our students to go home. We are going to use different modalities. We may give them assignments, paper-based assignments. We may give them projects. But we also want to use our Google Classroom or Google Suite for Education as the platform for ensuring that our students learn. What does Google Suite for Education look like? The Ministry of Education has made a decision to adopt Google Classroom as our official learning platform. Now, in order to make sure that every single child and every single teacher understands how to use Google Classroom, we have done a lot of homework, basically. First things first, the Ministry of Education would have ensured that every single private school that is interested, every single tertiary institution that showed interest, and every single public school is placed on Google Classroom. So it means that come September, every child would have a Google Classroom account, and every child would have a specific Google Classroom email address. All of that would have already started. We'd have already put all of those things in place. We have already done the training for our teachers. Primary school, public, private, and tertiary institutions that demonstrated an interest. So we've started out by doing a face-to-face instruction with our teachers to get them used to what Google Classroom should look like, and then they are presently going through online training. Now, if teaching and learning is going to take place in an environment where all our stakeholders come together, that is our parents, our students, and our teachers, it means that our parents should also know what Google Classroom is all about, what it looks like, and how they can support their children using Google Classroom. So through ABS and in collaboration with ABS, we will be in very short order showcasing our parent training in Google Classroom. So that is what we will be doing. We will be going through with parents and explaining to parents how you get onto Google Classroom. What does the platform look like? How do you help your children upload information, download information? So we will be doing all of that in short order, and we are encouraging parents because Google Classroom will become a staple. After COVID-19, our education system and the way in which we educate our students is never going to be the same again. It is going to be better. So it means that we want to ensure that every single parent understands how to manipulate Google Classroom, how to use it, and how to help their children. That blended learning is going to be a staple in our education system, and we are going to make sure that that happens. We also intend to do training for our principals and our deputy principals and other persons who are going to be monitoring what is happening on Google Classroom, because we do not want our students on the platform and nobody is monitoring to make sure that instruction is taking place. Because remember, we are talking about a hybrid kind of education where face-to-face is easy to monitor because the teacher is there, the student is there, the principal is there, we are able to see what is happening. But we also have the online platform, the online learning. On the back end of Google Classroom, our principals can see what our teachers are doing on there, what our students are doing on there. They can monitor what is happening in Google Classroom, and we will be providing the training for persons to do that. Lastly, we are also going to be conducting additional training. We've been doing our ESI training that would have been happening over the summer vacation. We also will be doing that continuous monitoring like I would have mentioned before. We will also be offering teachers professional training because, you know, we have been doing the once a month training for all our teachers. That has been going on for years. We will continue that. And it is even more important now because as teachers come up with difficulties, we will better be able to deal with them and support them. We will be doing some virtual training using places like Coursera and Commonwealth of Learning and so forth. But two very important things that we will want to ensure, especially with the development and training of our students. COVID-19 has placed our teachers and our students in a very stressful situation. The psychosocial and emotional needs of our students and our teachers, we have to take care of that. So in order for us to return to normalcy and in order for us to ensure that our teachers and our students are in a place where they can continue to learn and continue to teach, we are going to be taking care of our psychosocial needs of our students. And our department, our counseling department, will take care of that. We also appreciate the fact, and Director would have alluded to it, we appreciate the fact that COVID-19 has also placed our students in a situation where the economy is not going to be what it used to be, or students and parents may not be able to provide for monetarily the way they used to. So it means that the government has made a commitment to continue the social services that it would have been providing. Our school meals, the school uniform grant is still going on, and we encourage parents who need it, apply. The application process is there. You can put the drop box within the Ministry of Education, or it can be done online. But we want to assure all parents, all students and teachers that we are working to ensure that not only our curriculum is going to be covered, and that every single child will be placed in a position where, despite the loss of remote learning, we will get our children back to the place where they are supposed to be. But we're also going to ensure that we provide the support for our teachers, for our principals, and schools in general. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Jonah Green. Mrs. Maskell, we go back to you now for a look at technology support to guide the return to schools.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Charles. And Mrs. Green would have done brilliantly in laying out the training, because training and technology are enablers to the process. And so I will just touch briefly on our technology plans. And we are proposing that we use low-end technology, and that would be like what we would have done during the COVID when we had a lockdown, the paper-based approach, where materials are printed and students are given worksheets and so on. And then we have our legacy technology. Of course, ABS would have contributed in a major way in bringing Homeschool 101. We are very much looking forward to Series 2. And so we would have been also given at the Cabinet of Antigua and Barbuda, and I can assure you our ministers are with us, they are supporting us, and already we have been given Channel 11 that will be designated towards education, and so we are very much excited about that. Our high-end technology, which comprises of our computer devices. As you know, we have our secondary public schools. They were furnished with devices, and so that also contributed to the success that we would have had in the lockdown in terms of reaching the number of students that we did. And Mrs. Green would have tabled the online platforms that Google Classroom or Google Suite for Education is our main platform that we'll be delivering content on. And the YouTube, we do have a YouTube channel, and we are proposing that that will be in an asynchronous modality. But we are also excited that there's that possibility of streaming live from our classrooms that we are currently exploring, and so that will bring us into a synchronous mode. But with all that said, we need the internet. It so happened that in our secondary schools, we were furnished with fiber optic. We were just about to test that structure, but then COVID came. And so once we get back into schools, we need to test to see if we can have the number of students online and how much of a difficulty, how much of a challenge that would be. And so I know for each secondary schools, you have 100 megabytes. We also have primary. They do have the DSL, right? But we are hoping to even go into further conversations as to how we could improve those structures. As it is, yes, we do have internet challenges here and there. As I said, a new platform we're hoping to test, but then we have to understand that there is so much and so much that we can get nationally, and so we're hoping the dedication remains with us in terms of education. Now, when we had the lockdown, the internet service providers, Flow and Digicel, they came forward and asked the ministry, look, send us a listing of educational sites that we could zero rate. And that would make it easier for parents, teachers who are delivering using certain sites. And so we did. And so that would have allowed that internet affordability for both teachers and parents. And we are looking forward to continue that sort of engagement with our partners. And of course, because we are not yet at the ideal where a device is placed in every child's hand, we have basically commissioned a team who is now doing some analysis in terms of costing analysis so that we can then see how best we can move forward in terms of further integrating the technology into our teaching and learning environment. And so I just want to say thank you to those persons or those companies who would have reached out and who continues to support. And I just want to make this plug. I first want to thank the teachers for the work that they have done. I know it is not easy, and the level of commitment that was demonstrated is really applaudable. But I also want to encourage all of our partners, our business, private sector, please, education, as director would have indicated, is everybody's business. Come on board, give us a call, let us know what you can do to support this process. Thank you.
Mr. Charles, I realize we are running out of time, and so I'm just going to, in one sentence, I like paragraphs, but I'm not going to go with no paragraph now. In one sentence, I just want to assure the public that the conversation continues. I want to leave a little time so that questions couldn't be asked. So I want to assure the public that the conversation continues. We will continue to communicate. We will continue to consult. We will continue to collaborate. And so, look out for us, listen for us, and if you have anything to share, we are looking for the most excellent way to go.
All right, let me thank the team for being. Let me thank the team for the very thorough presentation. As you would have realized, every major aspect that possibly impacts upon students' ability to be able to receive education, from the mode of them getting to school and getting from school, when they're at school, the phased approach in which students are going to be returning to school, including the shift system that's going to be implemented in several schools, both public and private, and also the phased approach in terms of for instance, first formers going on one day, fifth formers going, all the different forms going on a different day. You would realize that we would have looked at, not just by ourselves, but in consultation with a broad number of stakeholders, from the unions, especially with our key partners, the Ministry of Works and Ministry of Education affiliate, the Board of Education, in being able to facilitate the change in the environment, ensuring that there's cleaning and also sanitization that takes place on a regular basis, the physical spaces that will be accommodated, adjusted, and increased, and the adaptations to the curriculum, including the increased infusion of technology, and also the training for not just teachers, pedagogues, but also for parents, and also for those parents who are also interested, continue to make available the option of homeschooling. I know we did not get into that extensively, but there's also that option. And for those persons who are interested, as a matter of fact, homeschooling has existed before COVID, and several parents have already taken advantage of the opportunity to homeschool his or her child or children. And so that option is also available as well. So with all options being on the table for parents, we do at this time, again, I want to thank the team. I want to thank ABS, like the director said, for the continued support. And we want to thank the Ministry of Works, the Board of Education, and all the other stakeholders, both public and private sector, who would have come on board to help to make what we're doing a possibility. But again, I want to emphasize and I want to remind, this pandemic is nothing like we have ever seen in our lifetimes. And so we also want to assure the public that the plans that we are putting forward, because we don't know what tomorrow will hold, the best we can do is plan and move forward. But keep in mind, things could change, and things may change at a moment's notice. And as always, we will always come back to the table and let you know, in association with our one of our most valued partners, ABS Television, that if changes are to be made, we will make those changes. At this time, we'll open for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Let me thank all panelists for what we deem a very open, practical, thorough approach to the presentation this morning. Thank you to the Minister for Education, Science and Technology, Director of Education, Mrs. Jonah Green, Mrs. Maskell, Mrs. Mills, and Dr. Antonio. Thank you so much. Joining us via virtual means, we have a few of our media partners. We have Nathan Owens of Radio Lighthouse. We've got Orville Williams from Newsco/Observer, and Zoe Williams of ZDK Radio. I'm sure they'll allow me to ask just 2 questions, media partners, before we hear their questions. I'll just start with this. Much has been made about comorbidities and those students who are fearful, whose parents are fearful of sending their children back to school. Allowances have been made for those who cannot wear masks to present medical certificates, etc. For those who cannot return to school, or perhaps their parents do not wish for the children to return to school, are allowances being made for that? Or do they have to apply to homeschool their children? What would that look like?
As the minister would have just said, the Ministry of Education is looking into all possibilities, and he did offer the option of homeschooling. And incidentally, the homeschooling, the outline, the exact way you apply, and everything that pertains to homeschooling is enshrined in the Education Act, Section 81 of the Education Act of Antigua and Barbuda 2008. But in addition to that, we have pulled out from the Act the relevant portions that persons would need, inclusive of how to set up an education plan. And as we speak, as a matter of fact, last night, so an application form was developed. I have it right in my hand. An application form was developed, and we have pulled out some guidelines that we have placed on the ministry's website, and so parents can just go there, access, download, complete the form, prepare the education plan, and submit that application to the Ministry of Education. In addition to homeschooling, Mr. Charles, the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology is looking into the development of an online school. Now, it is true that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we just need, developing a school is not just like abracadabra. It is going to take a little bit, and so we are looking into that possibility as well. All things that are possible, we intend to try to engage them.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Director, Mr. Brown. Let me just ask another question. In terms of the phased-in approach, and Mrs. Mills spoke to that, there are some schools for which a system has not yet been set. It says to be finalized. Is there a deadline by which this will be done, and will the information come directly from the school or from the Ministry of Education?
This information will come. You see, the schools, the problem is that those schools are, the 2 schools that I think Mrs. Mills named would have been TNK, not TNK. I think she would have named
J.T. Ambrose and a few others.
J.T. Ambrose, Mary Piggott, and maybe TNK. We have a sort of plan. It's just that it's not finalized. Schools, we are looking at the infrastructure. We are looking at the population size and everything, and we're just working out the kinks there. And once those are worked out, then it will be communicated to parents. The way the ministry works is that the schools present their instructional plans. And so we are continuing to work with schools. Those schools are kind of, big schools, and they initially presented a little bit of difficulty in working out and fine-tuning some things. But we're almost there, and once we're there, we will share with the parents.
Okay. Media partners, just indulge me one more question. In doing your broad analysis of other best case scenarios, best practices, I'm sure you'll come across several schools or several scenarios where countries opened their schools and had to close their schools. Do we have a remedial plan in action, for instance, if a school develops 5 students who have tested positive for the virus? Do you have a plan in place to say, if 1 tests positive, we will scale back. If 2 tests positive, we will close? Is that in place?
Yes, Mr. Charles, we continue to work with the Ministry of Health, because they, obviously, the health experts are going to guide us, but we do have a clear plan, and that's why we are talking about even a blended approach to education. Even if schools are going now in a regular way, they are still expected to do this blended approach, because if we come to a place where we have to shut down, then we will have to go online, and that is why the government is seeking to provide computer systems for all students, as well as other things. So if we have to shut down, then we will shut down. Whatever we have to do, Mr. Charles, we will definitely do. But there is a clear plan in place. Obviously, the time frame within which we're working this morning is a short one, and we can't speak to everything. And that's why I said we will always come back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Let me just allow my media partners an opportunity now. Zoe, again, apologies for getting your last name wrong. This is Zoe Carlton from ZDK. Zoe, go ahead with your questions, please.
That's right. I forgive you freely. Thank you very much. Thank you to the board for the informative session we've just had. There aren't many questions left to ask. It's been so thorough. But one of the questions I would like to ask is, what about those families that do not have internet? Is there something going to be set in place for them?
Well, yes. We have definitely come up with a plan with reference to those children or those parents without internet. Within the school system, and our secondary schools in particular, there is internet on the compound. So we have developed a plan where, in using Google Classroom, at the end of their face-to-face instruction day, the students can use the school's internet and download the work onto a flash drive or their systems. When they get home, they work offline. And the following day, when they return to school for face-to-face instruction, they simply upload to Google Classroom. That way, those students without internet access, they are able to access the academic tasks that need to be accessed. They are able to work home offline, and they are able to bring back their assignments. For those students who have limited internet access, we have had also a continued relationship with our internet service providers, Lime, Flow, INET. And Google Classroom is a zero-rated site. So what happens for those persons with limited access? All they have to do is to jump onto the internet, get onto Google Classroom, and while they are working online on Google Classroom, there will be no charge for working online. So we have put the necessary mechanisms in place to ensure that no child will be disenfranchised, and every single student, whether they have internet access or limited internet access, they will be able to access their academic tasks.
Thank you very much. And something was said a couple of weeks ago that senior school students would be provided with computers and younger children with iPads. Is that still the plan?
What we have in place, as Director would have suggested, is a flexible plan. I would have said in my technology presentation that there is still a team that is basically continuing to work towards the ideal. Now, as it relates to that specific question, what we would have done in our secondary schools where we have our e-book solution, children were provided with a tablet. Now we're trying to make sure that our students have a more powerful equipment in their hand, especially now that the whole concept of e-testing at CSEC is coming to reality, and to better, instead of, as we look to change out those old systems because they would have reached their shelf life, we are not going to be replacing them with tablets. We are going to be sourcing laptops. So we'll be outfitting those students from 3rd to 5th with laptops. And then those systems that are in basically enough condition, we will be repurposing at the primary so we can expand that way. But certainly the plan is to reach to the ideal, and so discussions, because it's going to be a costly venture to put a device in every child's hand, but we know that that is the ideal, and we continue to work towards that ideal.
Thank you very much. I pass on to my colleagues.
All right, thank you, Zoe Carton there from ZDK. Let's go to Nathan. Nathan Owens, Radio Lighthouse. Nathan, good morning. Go ahead with your questions, please.
Good Good morning, ladies. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your thorough presentation. I have a quick question in relation to the school reopening check sheet, which was put out by the Ministry of Education. The last item states the school has been inspected by an external inspection team. Just a quick question, who makes up that external team, and who do schools contact in order to be inspected?
The first part of the question is the external inspection team will, of course, comprises of personnel from the Ministry of Health. And the second part, who do schools contact? Schools always contact the Ministry of Education. Each school has an education officer administration, and so once the school comes through the education officer administration, we will make the arrangements for inspection. Just before school begins, a joint team of personnel from the Ministry of Education, the Antigua and Barbuda Union of Teachers, and the Department of Health will check all schools, and the checklist that you would have seen online or however you would have gotten hold of the copy, that checklist will be applied right across the education system.
Thank you very much for that information. One other question about that checklist. Item number 37 states internet access available on all areas on school compound. Does that have to be wired? Can it be wireless? Does every single classroom have to have it? And I think you spoke a little bit to it before, but the rationale behind that is what?
We just want all our students to be able at school to be able to access the internet. Now, the ideal is for everywhere to have Wi-Fi or wireless internet, but we're just checking to see what is available. I don't think that there is a utopia anywhere. And so the checklist doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be 100% perfect, but at least there must be a reasonable amount of internet so that students can access with reasonable bandwidth.
Thank you very much for all your hard work that you've put into this thus far.
All right, thank you, Nathan, for your questions. Let's go to Orville. Finally, Orville Williams from News Coast, that's Observer. Orville, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Director, and the rest of the women on the panel. My first question would be, could you just kind of give us an indication of how, if and how the extent to which students and parents were consulted in the decisions on the various protocols and processes that have been put in place? There's often the complaint that parents are left out of the loop, their advice is not being considered, at least to a substantial extent. So could you just shed some light on how much they were involved in this entire planning process?
We have made an attempt to involve all our stakeholders in the planning process. We had surveys available for parents, and parents were able to provide information as well. We will very soon be meeting with other organizations that are responsible for parents as well. We have also met with our teacher organizations. So the Ministry of Education, we would have made a wide range attempt to contact all individuals and all stakeholders. We also appreciate the fact that some parents would have contacted us to provide information or ask questions and all of that, and we would have made an attempt to be available for those persons, and we would have reached out as best as we could to a large cross-section of our population.
And through all schools, through all school principals, then parents, all our plans and policies are transmitted to parents, and their concerns are transferred back to the Ministry of Education. Principals are an extension of the Ministry of Education.
All Thank you very much for that response. My second and final question is on the medical personnel in schools. I just note that I do remember the director spoke to this, the comparison from March, I guess, at the onset of the pandemic until now. It's a difference in the protocols that were non-existent then and are now. So earlier, there was some gaps. There were principals that were coming out publicly saying that the ministry is saying that nurses are placed in schools, temperature checks are mandatory, but they're saying that these things weren't in place. I understand that there are a lot of gaps at that time. What is being put in place now? Is it basically a foolproof system now where all of these things that are supposed to be in place will be in place?
In a few of our schools, we have school nurses already assigned. The Ministry of Education is mindful that there is a shortage of nurses in the country. What we have done, in every school, there is someone who has been trained in first aid, at least one. So we have organized widespread training for that to have happened. In addition to that, the Ministry of Education, I talked earlier about consultation with Cabinet, one of the things we suggested to the Cabinet of Antigua-Barbuda, mindful that there is a shortage of nurses in the country, that the ministry will be seeking of Cabinet to perhaps engage some of the retired nurses so that they could offer that kind of service to our schools. And so that is the plan.
Thank you very much, Director. That was my final question.
All right, thank you, Nathan. Just allow me to ask another question. In terms of monitoring the students inside the classroom, of course, the teacher's responsibility. What happens when students are out in the field, for instance? Is the security guard then responsible for monitoring that there is social distancing, the students still wear their masks, etc.?
Mr. Charles, you were a teacher one time, and teachers are responsible for monitoring students. You know that you were responsible during break for monitoring the students under your charge. You see, there are some responsibilities that are left with the management of schools. And so school principals will work out with their staff how students are constantly monitored. Breaks, students are going to not all be sent out, because it would be a nightmare if we were to release all students out to break in the way we used to do it pre-COVID. Breaks are going to be staggered. Form teachers and homeroom teachers and so on will work out with school management exactly how our students are monitored.
All right. I'm not sure I should say thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, Mrs. Joanna Green, your curriculum recovery plan. This is my final question. In terms of differentiation, those students who need extra attention, those perhaps who would have fared well during the process, how is that process to be managed? Is that to be left to the schools in terms of that differentiation? And will there then be standardized testing across the board to ensure that all students are learning?
Well, no, not at all. It is a primary responsibility of school administration to ensure that the curriculum is monitored and that teachers are monitored, and to ensure that what ought to be taught would be taught. But you also have to appreciate that we also have curriculum officers within the Ministry of Education that would also provide support for schools as well. That is why we are talking about training. That is why we are talking about professional development. Where there's a need, we are going to provide that support. So in addition, so we have different layers and different tiers. We are going to be doing assessment to figure out where our students are. We will still have our standardized assessments. We have our grade 2 assessment, grade 4 assessment, grade 6 assessments. Those actually help us to figure out where our students are at different places, and the intervention that is also provided through the measurement and evaluation department to help teachers to figure out where they are and to take them to the next level. Our curriculum unit, headed by Mrs. Beverly Allen, she is going to also work along with curriculum officers to provide that other tier of support. So we do have a plan in place, starting from the school, the teacher, the principal as an administrator, the Ministry of Education, the curriculum officers, and our standardized testing, our formative testing, that is what happens in the classroom on a daily basis, the individual tests that the students receive. All of those things, when we bring them all together, we would be able to get a fairly good idea as to where our students are and what we need to do to get them to the next level, and we will be able to provide the support for teachers to ensure that we get them where they are supposed to be.
All right, I did say that was my final question, but let me just ask one more, crave your indulgence. I don't think much was said, not that I heard anyway, about special needs education and early childhood education. Can we shed some light on both those areas, please?
Yes, I'm just going to begin the process because there's so much. In the actual plan, there is a special section for special ed. And just coming from what Mrs. Green would have shared just now, there are special assessments that will be done for students after the ready assessments, and we see their major gaps. There is, for example, for literacy, there is a DAR kit that will be used with these students. We also have our key math tool that will be used to do the numeracy assessments. So there is a plan in place to help to support our students. In addition, I know the work with our special ed school, like Adele School, would have been major during the lockdown. In fact, there was a team that went out to actually check up on these students, carrying packages to them and so forth. So there has been work, and work will still be ongoing for our special ed students.
Yes, and additionally, we have an early childhood development unit as well, headed by Mrs. Emble Spencer. So she would have been putting all the procedures in place to ensure that our early childhood development is well taken care of. I'm sure you're aware that we have 3 public centers and we have many of the private centers. We would have developed special protocols that would have been vetted by the Ministry of Health, and presently, we have been doing the checks for all the early childhood centers to make sure that they are where they are supposed to be. So we have looked at all sectors of the education, all our educational sectors, and we have put procedures in place to ensure that that happen. And even with our curriculum recovery plan, there is a section for special education, special needs, early childhood. So we have covered all the bases basically for all the sectors of our education system.
I just want to reiterate that we have left absolutely no area of the education system unturned. We have examined and developed protocols for every area.
I want to emphasize here, though, that, and again, I want to thank the Ministry of Education team, not just those who are here for all the hard work, but for the persons that they also represent collectively for the ministry. And I want to remind as well that it's not just the Ministry of Education headquarters that constitutes and comprises the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. It's the teachers, it's the principals, it's the level heads, it's the groundsmen, it's the cleaners. It's an entire team. We are the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, not those who are speaking here. In order for this to be a success, it means that everybody has to come on board to make sure that this plan, and as you can realize, we're catering for just under 20,000 students across Antigua and Barbuda. It would be an impossible task for us to drill down on a micro level as to what's going to happen at every single individual school, what pertains to every single child. That's an impossible task in this short period of time. What we're focused on here to do is presenting the macro planning, and of course the individual, the smaller plan, the larger plan will be made available to individual schools. And as you would realize, what applies in one school may not apply in another school. But some basic things you're going to see fundamentally in all schools. When you go to any school across Antigua and Barbuda, especially public schools, you're going to see that students, everyone who's entering the compound, your temperature is going to be checked, whether by a nurse or another trained personnel. who is there. Your temperature is going to be checked. You're going to be asked to sanitize. If you don't have any pertinent business on that compound, you will not be allowed to access. And if you try to access otherwise, you will be forcibly removed, because we are very serious about protecting the physical space of that environment. You will not have a situation where all children are going back to any one particular school at the same time. Even at the grades level, you will realize that there is a phased-in process that will occur. So, for instance, in week 1, you will see, for instance, in the primary schools, you will see only grades 1, grades 2, and grade 6 will go back to school for the first week. The second week, you will see that grades 3, 4, and 5, they will be able, so there's a phased approach even for the primary schools, and in some individual schools, you will realize that the shift system is an option as well. For the secondary school, you will also realize that there's a phased approach. So you will not see a secondary school where you'll have all the students in one day on the school compound. The changes in the curriculum is to accommodate, so there will be the access in the traditional format, but not looking like the traditional format. There will always also be the option in terms of the internet, what's being done online, the infusion of technology with instruction. You're also going to see us focus a lot more in terms of informed interdisciplinary approaches to various subject areas. What you're also going to realize is that a lot of students are going to be tasked with working more independently in completing their task on task. We want to ensure that absolutely no child is left behind. But the truth is, we can do all the planning possible. We could have all the technology in place, but it still boils down to parents and students doing your part. In order for this to be a success, in order for this to work, parents, I am now speaking directly to you. When your children leave home, make sure that you would have instilled in them their safety and their survival is dependent on their behavior. Because even if they're going on the school bus or they're going on a regular bus, teachers are not there. It is what you would have instilled with them and follow up and enforce to make sure that they are behaving the way that you expect them to behave, following the protocols. So, for instance, when you see children going to and from across St. John's, you will realize that their behavior should be reinforced based on what their parents are instilling in them. When they come to school, we do understand it is not like before. Now, before COVID, for the most part, you see parents and guardians mostly at graduation time. Everybody look pretty, they look nice, they come, but you can't find them before. This is not that type of environment anymore. In order for your child to be able to make it, we are doing our very best to provide the support for them. Physical classroom learning, the hybrid approach. We're moving towards a full online school in Antigua and Barbuda, the first of its kind. There's the homeschool option that's available. It's always been there. The reality is many persons who apply for homeschool, they think you just come and say, oh, here, homeschool. No, that's not how it works. There's a process to ensure that you're doing what's necessary to ensure that your child gets the necessary education. So parents, we want to encourage you. You've already begun those conversations with your youngsters when they get to the school environment, and each child within their school, they start to move in their bubble. Because each school at each grade level, children are going to be moving in their bubble. So for instance, you will not see students from one grade being outside at the same time with a student from another level, or they will not be having lunch at the same time. So if God forbid that we have an emergency situation, we can safely close off that bubble, allow that bubble to go into quarantine while the school is deep cleaned and then sanitized. And I want to emphasize deep cleaned and then sanitized, all of which we're training personnel to be able to do now. And we would have had a good trial in terms of the opening for CSEC exams. And for the most part, considering it's the first time that we have functioned in a pandemic, CSEC went relatively hitch-free. And so we have built on the experiences that we would have utilized during that time, using best practices for everything that we would have heard from education systems around the world, including our stakeholder partners, health officials, PAHO, the World Health Organization, OECS, UNICEF, UNESCO, all the others. So we're relying on information that we would have gleaned in terms of what are the best possible practices to be able to open school. And having put all that together, we are still saying, are we fully satisfied? If we were, would have said, this is the complete document and there's nothing else can be added. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying, this is a continuous learning process. And we advise persons, we may change things at a moment's notice. And of course, you know, we will do the general consultations, but things may change because this pandemic environment, it continues to be fluid. And we want to be in a position, working with our stakeholders to ensure that we do our best to make sure that no child is left behind. But it's not just our job, but parents, students, it's our job to ensure that our children continue to receive an education in a safe environment. Again, I want to thank the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, not just the persons who are present here, but for all persons who are pedagogues or in some way work in support of the education system, from those at the school plant to those persons going on the school bus, to those persons responsible for the physical maintenance of the plants, to the persons who deal in administration and supervision, to the persons dealing in pedagogy and assessments and evaluation of our students. We want to thank keenly again our stakeholders, and we can't underemphasize this enough. Several years ago, we undertook one of the most brazen expansion of our physical school plants in a long, long time. The reality is, this summer, we were also engaged, quietly so, in a brazen expansion and physical revitalization of our physical school plants, primarily looking at most of our primary schools. And the reality is, we want to make sure that as school opens up, that we continue to deliver education. We deliver education in a safe but new environment, on the new context, with different modalities of getting the education being delivered to our students, and working even more closely with our key stakeholders or partners, and of course the infusion of technology to be able to accomplish this. And most importantly, ABS, you continue to be a valuable partner, and not just for our press conferences, for supporting our traditional programs, but as we transition towards an online school, Channel 11 is going to be dedicated to a full educational channel, working collaboratively with ABS. So you're talking about the traditional delivery of education in the school environment, the hybrid delivery of education, a full online school that will be available to those who it best accommodates, the homeschooling option, and of course, school on television. And we will continue to explore. And of course, you would have heard about our YouTube channel, the Ministry of Education YouTube channel, and we are going all out, including all the various aspects of social media to be able to educate our students, and training not just teachers and so on, but training parents to be able to access what's available. So comprehensively, we will continue to evaluate what we're doing, and we will continue to revise it to ensure that we can reach all the necessary persons that we need to reach. Thank you again, and we do look forward for this continued collaborative effort to transform our young, eager minds into bright and engaging citizens of tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let me say thank you again for the depth of the presentation and for your concession that this is a fluid process and continues to be a work in progress. Let me say thank you to Minister Michael Brown, Minister for Education, Science and Technology, Sir Claire Brown Esquire, the Director of Education, Mrs. Ezra Jonah Green, who is the Acting Deputy Director of Education, Mr. Stacey Maskell, who is the Assistant Director of Education with responsibility for planning, training, research, and educational services. Mrs. Denise Mills, Acting Education Officer for Administration, Secondary Schools, and Dr. Desiree Antonio, Education Officer for Administration in Primary Schools, particularly Zone 3. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Thank you to our media partners who joined us virtually as well. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, all of you for tuning in to this very, very important press conference this morning. On behalf of the production team here and the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, have a good day.